I'm going to be debating against Orlando's speech, which his major claim was that the private sector can do projects similar to NASA's more efficiently. My opponent's secondary claims were that the private sector can do projects similar to NASA with fewer expenses. 2, the private sector can implement projects more quickly than a government agency. And 3rd, that the private sector will be able to focus more on independent projects without being a contractor to NASA. Before I begin this debate, I want to state what the private sector investment refers to, which is organizations run by private individuals or groups in order to profit, and public sector investment refers to investments from the government of state. Okay, my response to his secondary one claim is, he said that change in leadership can cause more expenses for projects within NASA, but there's no support for this claim. He did mention the Constellation program, and that was used for his evidence, yet there was no date of evidence of how much it was delayed as far as expenses. There was no examples of budget comparisons or even projects that have been delayed. Building technology that has never been built before is incredibly challenging. Estimating costs becomes almost impossible, especially in a 30-year project like Webb. But that is precisely why space is best left with NASA. Had the Webb telescope been a project in a private company, funding would have stopped years ago. NASA continues to pursue this project not because they hope for a return of their investment, but because they see the social utility in such a project. Even if moving at the speed of light, it would take decades, even hundreds of years, to reach an extrasolar planet. This kind of investment of time makes it highly unlikely that the private sector would pursue the research to undertake such tasks. Since NASA is not in the private sector, it has been able to fund research in life-saving technologies and many knowledge-advancing projects without having to focus on making a profit. My response to his secondary claim number 2 is that for his second claim, he said that the private sector can implement jobs more quickly than a government agency because NASA has to wait for approval. Yet I disagree in terms of innovation, because the private sector is not suited for long-term projects. This is because corporations are based on quarterly reporting. If a project takes 20 years to complete, or even just to show some progress, that project is less likely to receive continuing funding. Often this will lead to a project being cut. That is why when it comes to space, the government agency NASA is better suited for innovation and progress, and there needs to be some form of government involvement. My response to his secondary claim, number 3, is that for his third claim, he argues that the private sector will be able to focus more on independent projects and that rather than thinking of it for NASA. The private sector would be able to allocate its thinking into their priorities. This seems hypothetical and nothing really compared. This is kind of an assertion that he has. This is where government agencies such as DARPA have an advantage over the private sector because they can afford to be more concerned with results than with costs. They still have to worry about the path dependency, but with fewer factors that push them in a particular direction. Without a quarterly schedule and pressure for a return on investment, agencies like DARPA can and does pursue seemingly outlandish ideas. To illustrate this point, Virgin Galactic wouldn't exist if not for the help from NASA. In 2007, Virgin and NASA signed a memorandum of understanding with each other. And this set forth that NASA and Virgin Galactic would work together and gain help for research in the process. Without the help of NASA's cumulative research on hypersonic vehicle concept maturation, computational fluid dynamics, and simulation support, Virgin Galactic might not exist. Private enterprise needs NASA not to do the basic research that they cannot do. This governing power NASA has would be lost if it was privatized. Things like space-based strike weapons would be a real threat, according to the Space Security Index, an annual assessment of space security. If NASA was privatized, it would lose this power over outer space, and it would open up to the opportunity for even space terrorism to occur. NASA is essential to the American people because it has produced significant advantages in technology that private corporations cannot. In the annual journal Spin-Off, NASA showcases all the technological advancements it has commercialized. NASA has brought in straight, persistent lenses, personal alarm systems, virtual reality or solar energy, Teflon, and many other used technologies that the American people do not even realize that NASA invented. Therefore, NASA cannot be abolished because the American people will lose an agency that holds historical significance. If NASA was privatized, the American people will lose a federal agency of historical significance and a positive part of their cultural and epic government made possible. Thank you.
All right, the structure's fine. The main and secondary points are labeled. On your individual points, especially the first two, I thought I heard a lot of claims and inferences being made, but I didn't hear much evidence being presented to support any of those. You basically challenged the Constellation Project as being an adequate example that the advocate is using, but all you do is you say it's not really an adequate example. You don't tell us why it's inadequate or what the what alternative ways of making a comparison would be. There's a discussion of the Webb telescope, and I don't know where the information came from. I don't know who paid for it. So there's some information that you've got there, but you haven't put it into a cited format on that particular point, and I thought that was a little bit problematic. The same thing is true on the second point, where you talk about the private sector is not really suitable for funding these kinds of long-term projects or things where there isn't an immediate profit seen available. That's all a claim, but I didn't hear any reason to believe that that is in fact the case. There's no examples of failure to invest or pulling out of investments that didn't pay off quickly, and so it seems like you've got an explanation here, but that's all you have on that. On the third point, I did hear a little bit more information. I heard reference to DARPA without an explanation of what DARPA is and how it illustrates the point that you're talking about. I did hear a source citation for the Virgin Galactic and the NASA information and their memo of understanding, and that there's going to be research sharing. Although your inference seems to be that it wouldn't exist without NASA, I'm not exactly sure that that's the conclusion that the evidence draws. The other point that follows up that seems to be a potential disadvantage about not having NASA is that space would be exploited by people for military or security purposes, and you do have a quote on that. It's a little bit vague. I'm not sure if it applies to the advocate's claim. It might apply to a larger policy argument, but the application to this particular claim I think is a little problematic. And then on the last piece of evidence, you just have some general stuff about all the benefits that NASA-based projects have provided. You probably could use that early on, and if you could show, for instance, that those are the kinds of things that don't return a profit, I think that would support your point more. All right, thank you.